How you doing, peeps? Welcome to my Polytopia tribe tier list. Now a quick disclaimer here. This tier list is somehow based on my opinions, but I'll try to be as objective as possible on ranking these tribes. Also, this only covers the gameplay perspective of the tribes, ignoring music or aesthetics. Let's go. Now let's start with one of the free tribes of the game, the Chinchi, the hikers. They start with the climbing tech. Their terrain are mostly composed of mountains with a decent amount of metal in it. I know a lot of players look down on this tribe, but to be honest, they're a pretty decent one with those advantages they get from scouting a mountain, early defense on those same mountains. You have a quick shot on smithery which allows them to train early swordsmen if needed, and those mountains again are packed with mel, which gives them the mining route, giving them a lot of population and early giants. However, they have one flaw. They are slow. Not only slow economically because they are not a turn 0 tribe, but also slow because of their terrain packed with mountains. I know Chinchi loves their mountains, but it kinda discourages them to go on the riding route because you can't row the mountain, do you? I mean, it also can be used on their advantage. They can't be easily rushed with early riders, but they're slow, that's it. Now, how do I rank these hikers? Well, with all their advantages and weaknesses, I think they belong solid B, yeah. Next is Imperius, the fruit munchers, also the jack of all trades. They start with the organization tech which allows them to level up their capital at turn 0. Also, their terrain has no special spawn, which means it's neutral. This makes them a flexible tribe, and they have a straight shot to the shields tech which allows them to train shields in defending their cities or upgrade those shields into ships or battleships for naval dominance. The only weakness they have is their varied resource spawns. This means they will have a harder time getting their first giant without a more advanced tech in the early game. Overall, being the most balanced tribe in my opinion, they belong on the B tier. Okay, Barter, the hunters. They start with the hunting tech, and their terrain is mostly composed of animals, fruits, but their crops are reduced. This makes them a turn 0 tribe with bountiful resource and easy access to archery and catapults, which aids them in military during the early game. They don't really have a weakness, that's why they're nerfed. Pre-nerf Barter would definitely be S+ tier, but as it stands out right now, they belong on the A+. Last of the free tribe is Umaji. They start with a riding tech and a rider. Their terrain is heavily deforested and dried, which means no forest, no water, and possibly no fish. Now, the pros of this tribe is they got a rider start, which means they could spread fast, they attack fast, and they escape fast. Also, their crop is abundant because there are a lot of spaces for farms to grow. However, they are weighed down by their weak economy. They're also tech dependent. They need to research organization first, then farming, but this means they'll sacrifice some of their military power in the early game. Speaking of military power, they are forced to be aggressive in the early game to acquire villages with better resource spawn. This means that the only thing the player playing against Umaji needs to do is to stop the early aggressive and the Umaji is just dead. This is not difficult to do because the Umaji's starting unit is rider, and one whack from the warrior makes that rider useless. With all of that out of the way, I conclude that Umaji is D tier. It's not really good, to be honest. Only experienced players can pilot this tribe really well. The next tribe would be Kiku, the fishermen. They start with the tech fishing. Their terrain is composed of water with an increased spawn rate of fish and decreased spawn rate of mountains. Kiku is one of the best tribes in the game because of these few reasons. Number 1, they are a turn 0 tribe, which means they can upgrade their capital at turn 0. They also can build early navy They have a good custom houses location because of their fragmented terrain. And when it comes to late game, they have the best economy out of all of the other tribes. There are a few things though that keeps Kiku away from being an overpowered tribe. First, they have a slow start because of their fragmented, watery terrain. Next, their cities are coast dependent for fish resources or access to the ocean. And last, they are vulnerable to economic disruption, which means an enemy tribe can easily block Kiku's terrestrial resources and they have little to do about it except spending stars to research archery or sailing, which can be expensive in early game. Still, they are almost unstoppable in the late game because of their battleship spam. This is why Kiku is an A+ tier. Hudrik, I love to call them as the woody pokers, starts with tech archery. Their terrain is mostly composed of forest with reduced mountain spawn rates. Hudrik's a good tribe to be honest. They have an archer starter, giving them a military advantage in the early game. Their terrain is awesome for sawmill locations, and an early defense on forest is a welcome bonus. But of course, just like any tribe, Hudrik has some weaknesses. They are fragile at start because they start with an archer. They are vulnerable to night rushes, and their terrain is kind of anti-riding, which helps them against night rushes, but it discourages them from researching riding, except when they also go roads. Overall, Hudrik is a balanced tribe with strengths and weaknesses that can be played around. Those forests can be useful on lumber huts or can be chopped for an early night. A decent B tier. Upcoming is the most expensive tribe to purchase with microtransactions, the wealth lovers Luxidor. The terrain is composed of increased fruit spawns but reduced animal spawns. They don't really have a starting tech, but the catch here is that they start with a level 2 capital, without explorer or workshop. Luxidor is a flexible tribe with no major weaknesses and starts with a level 2 capital, helping them in the early game through warrior spam. However, like Barter, Luxidor is overshadowed by its former self. A level 3 walled capital at the start of a game would place them immediately at S+ or S tier, but as it stands right now, they are around A tier. Wenger, the tribe that uses brute force the most. They start with a smithery tech, and their terrain has greatly increased crop and metal spawns, with greatly reduced fish, animal, and fruit spawns. Many players either love or hate Wenger because of their characteristics. First, they start with a swordsman, giving them an oppressive early game. They also have abundant tier 2 resource, allowing them to catch up economically in the mid to late game. Their early game military comes at the cost of their early game economic development. They are forced to be aggressive, that is why they have less time focusing on developing their cities. Also, one of their weaknesses is that they are momentum dependent in terms of combat. You see, when their first few swordsmen fails to eliminate the enemy tribe, Wenger is kinda screwed. Now, where do they belong in the tier list? With a pathetic tier 1 resource spawns, their only niche in the game is on smaller, crowded maps. That is enough though to just place them at the bottom of the C tier at best. The farmers, Zebasi. They start with a farming tech and their terrain is composed of reduced forest, mountain, and fruit spawns. Being a turn 0 tribe, they are excellent in developing their cities without researching more techs. That is because farms give 2 population each. Their terrain is also rider friendly, which means they could rush riders and expand more. But they are not an overpowered tribe because, for example, they have limited opportunities for a defense boost from forests or mountains because they have reduced spawns of those, and they are too farming dependent, which means an enemy warrior or any enemy unit that could step on their crop would greatly hinder their economic development. At the end of the day though, they are still a really good tribe. I would place them at A tier. Next is the IMO. They love isolating in peace because they start with a meditation tech. The terrain is composed of increased mountain spawns, but greatly reduced crop spawns. IMO is a unique tribe. They could get the Altar of Peace at third 5 if they wanted to by not attacking, and they also have a straight shot to Philosophy, which gives a discount to the techs. IMO has a lot of cons though. First, they have varied resources just like Imperius, which means they are tech dependent, although you could counter that with Philosophy. Next, they have vulnerable start if you wanted to rush Altar of Peace. And they're kinda slow, anti-riding because of the mountains, but it helps them isolate themselves, which helps the rush of Altar of Peace. So IMO's weakness is not much of a weakness, it's just their thing. IMO does best on larger maps with fewer players, but struggles on the opposite spectrum. This is why I would rate IMO at the top of C tier. Now let's talk about Quetzale, the Burr Boys. Personally, this is my favorite tribe, and they start with a shield stack. Their terrain is mostly composed of so many fruits in exchange of so little farms. They have a few perks of their own. First, they start with their own shield unit, which makes the Quetzale a hard tribe to rush on. They also have abundant resources in hand, enabling them to level up cities for around level 3. Their main weakness is that they have poor economic scaling in the late game, and they're kinda limited in offense, especially in early game. I know many players claim that Quetzale is a garbage tribe and not worth your money, but to be honest, they play really different compared to other tribes. They're kind of a disruptor tribe, preventing enemies from scaling into the late game while you launch your attack on them. Which means I can't really place Quetzale higher than C tier. Ooh, Yadak, the Road Boys. I know many players love this tribe because they're really fun and fast. They start with a road stack, and the terrain is composed of increased fruit spawns with decreased forest and mountain spawns. Because they have roads at start, they are quick in expansion and hit and run tactics. There are also abundant resources around, which gives them a little boost in their economy early game. Their terrain is also rider friendly. Their only weakness is that they are dependent on expanding their territory, and then they also have limited defense, just like Zibasi. Now that I think about it, Yadak and Zibasi are kinda same, with a little difference in terms of Yadak being able to expand faster in the early parts of the game, while Zibasi can develop their cities faster. I think it's fair that Yadak will be placed on the same tier as Zibasi. Let's tackle the first special tribe, Aquarian, the fish people. Their terrain is composed of many water tiles, and they have reduced forest spawns. Also, they don't have a starting tech, so that's nice, I guess. Now this tribe only has 3 strengths: early game aquatic exploration, great custom houses location because their terrain is composed of an archipelago, and tridentions. These, however, are overshadowed by Aquarian's many weaknesses. First, they are slow to start, just like Kiku. Also like Kiku, they are dependent on their coast. They have varied resources, which means they are tech dependent, and they're either forced into being aggressive or being isolated, none in between. Last, crabs. When one of your units is more viable than your super unit, then there is something wrong with the tribe. I don't want to be too harsh about Aquarian because I love playing them on 1v1 huge or massive maps. But to be honest, they need a buff. I'll place them barely at the top of F tier because of that little niche. Okay, next is Illyrian, the tribe that lives in a fantasy. They start with a forest magic tech, and the terrain is mostly composed of crops with reduced mountain spawn rates. Illyrian is, how do I say this? Wild, yeah. They have a powerful military at the start of the game, like Wenger. They have early access to archers and catapults just like Barter. They're also a really flexible tribe, to be honest. And they could see ruins on the fog of war. They are indeed a powerful tribe in the early game and the late game. The interesting thing here is that each of their strength has some cost, and that cost is part of their weaknesses. First, they are farming dependent in developing their cities, which means it is necessary for them to research organization. Then, on the early game, they could rush Politors or pick sanctuaries for economy, but not both. Their super unit, the Fire Dragon, needs some kind of a preparation to grow into its most powerful form, which can be devastating to the enemies with its range splash attack. This is a tribe that can do anything, but not everything, which means it deserves a high B rating. Following up is Polaris, one of the most unique and interesting tribes in the game. They start with the Frostwork tech, and their terrain is unique too. It is dependent on the terrain of the enemy. If you're playing a Polaris against a Polaris, well, the terrain is Imperius terrain. Polaris is such a good tribe in my opinion because they could manipulate terrain by freezing it or breaking it. They're also a flexible tribe, meaning that each game is kinda unique from one another. At turn 0, they already knew what kind of enemy they are facing with, and in terms of late game economy, they are one of the best. These are only its weaknesses. First, Polaris is kinda weak in the early game because they start with a Muni which has no attack and can only freeze. And their other weakness is that their Ice Bank has a limit, which means theoretically, custom houses are much better in the late game. Polaris is still a solid tribe, being able to manipulate terrain and disrupt enemies while also scaling economically. They deserve an A tier. The last tribe would be the newest tribe, Simunti. They start with farming and their terrain are mostly mountainous, and they also have 2 spores at the beginning near their capital. Being one of the most unique tribe in the game, they could create algae bridges. They could renew their fungi sources. They could poison enemies to eliminate their defense. They could boost to, increase their attack and movement. And hexapods in general are really oppressive. However, they have clear weaknesses. For example, they have limited naval capabilities because they only have Raid Chi and Fight Chi to go on water without the help of algae. They are also dependent on their shaman boost in the early game, and most of their units are generally fragile, which means they should be wary about knights. Unlike their overpowered pre-nerf version, the current Simunti can't even get a population under water tiles. This, in addition to their increased prices, lands Simunti on A tier in my opinion. This is now the finished version of the Polytopia tribe tier list. As y'all can see, none of the tribes belong on either S tier or -F tier. Mijiwan, the creator of Polytopia, did their best to balance each tribe and give them a shot in the competitive play. That is all, peeps. Have a good day.